This podcast is dedicated to the memory of David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Farron, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein, and to Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell. This is Zodiac speaking, a classic Gunpoint Campus podcast. I'm your host, Chris Garcia. This portion of Zodiac Speaking is all about the cultural impact of the murders. And there are a lot of ways to measure cultural impact. And in particular, looking at the pop cultural impact, there's one that's actually incredibly important, fairly distasteful, but also very real. And that is how pornography attaches itself to an idea. And in particular, in the early 1970s, the idea that any event, including film, political event, any of that, would almost automatically be subsumed and a pornographic film would be made. And we have to remember, around this time, we were seeing the start of what became known as porno chic. Typically, that is attached to films that happened after the famed Deep Throat and Forward. But there were some before that made a somewhat more cultural impact, and that included 1971's The Zodiac Rapist. And it is highly distasteful in every possible way. The idea that you had a cop chasing a serial rapist who called himself Zodiac and used a Zodiac-like symbol. It's as 100% distasteful as you can imagine. And for a number of reasons, it's just stupid. One of the ones that I find to be the most interesting is that we have no evidence that he was using these crimes as a sexual release methodology. Yes, there's a line in the method, it's even better than getting my rocks off with a girl. But to me, that's very, very thin. That's almost nothing. And honestly, I think it was just about the murders, not as a sexual gratification, but as a personal ego gratification, perhaps in place of sexual gratification. This stars John Holmes, who was the biggest star porn, probably until someone like a Jenna Jameson, probably the biggest star porn would ever create. I mean, Seika maybe. But here, he plays a Zodiac rapist. And it's about the cop chasing him, and the cop actually does most of the seduction. There are a couple of simulated rape scenes, of course, and some coercion scenes that are rape, but we at the time wouldn't have recognized it as such. It's, again, not anything I would recommend to go out and watch. But it's important to note for two big reasons. One, this shows the depth that Zodiac Killer's crimes had made their way into the zeitgeist. It is being referenced outside of just things that are dealing with crime. But two, and possibly more important, is the idea that what Zodiac meant was the boogeyman. This could have been about any number of different criminals, but it was about Zodiac. And specifically this idea that the Zodiac Killer represented the most reprehensible, most evil possible character. In essence, it could have been Satan, the satanic rapist, something like that. But no, using Zodiac is a marker for that. And that becomes highly important when you look at how we treat this idea of a serial killer as a portion of the popular culture. Because it has gone through and become such a major part of the fabric of everyday life. Part of that is because of the amount of coverage that it got from news stations. In particular, at that point, 3 major stations here in the Bay Area, ABC 7, Channel 4, which was KRON, the NBC affiliate, and Channel 5, which was the CBS affiliate, KPIX. Those 3 stations, along with all the newspapers, had constant Zodiac stuff, even into 1971, which was well beyond the initial crime phase. It was films like this that actually launched the whole porno chic thing and became so important and to the mainstreaming of pornography that has continued well into today. It ebbed and flowed, and for a while it was okay, kind of, to go and see a porn movie in a theater with a bunch of other people, but you were watching it more as a film, as an experience. And yeah, there were still people who were using it for titillation in various forms. But at that point, we had to remember there was no, well, very little home entertainment method for the delivery of pornography like this. You had 8mm loops on home projectors, but that was about it. Here, this is an encouragement of people to see a film in a theater. So there was that. This is a very strange aside in the world of the Zodiac crime, and one that I was considering not covering because of how 100% distasteful I find it. Not the porn aspect, that's fine, but the attachment of a mainstream actual series of murders. The murders of the 5 people I mentioned at the beginning of every episode. But then again, the porn industry isn't exactly known for good taste or the consideration of what would be positive for society at large. It's usually about making money. And apparently this made a fair bit of money. So, what are you going to do?